Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. Who has practiced or witnessed people who practice witchcraft or the occult? What experiences did you have? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I saw dashcam footage of a guy driving through America. He stops his car because there are bodies in the road laying there about 50 to 100 yards away. He floors the gas pedal, stops at a safe distance, and looks back. The bodies stand up, and they're all wearing ritual masks. About 50 more people with masks come out of the brush surrounding the now upright bodies. This guy saved his own life by ignoring the bodies on the road. I saw this on YouTube a couple of years ago. Now I can't find it, but I still remember it vividly. I know this seems suspicious, but I really do remember it. I actively practice witchcraft, and honestly, the more you dive into the occult and spiritual practices, the line between strange and normal gets really blurry. However, some of my most interesting experiences occurred while doing energy readings for other people. The way I read is by focusing on a person and on their energy, and I will see a sort of vision from them. I've seen a naked woman being crowned by the hands of a shadow, with serpents sitting at her feet like guard dogs. I've seen an extremely detailed or intricate dagger on a pedestal in an underground chamber, awaiting its next ritual. Most recently, I saw a teenage boy on a tall metal structure, preparing to leap over the edge and fly. I've also done something referred to as diving, which is a deep meditation meant to explore your own energy system or soul. You see all kinds of bizarre things when you start exploring yourself so intimately. I took up meditation for a short while for two reasons. I had really bad anger issues, and I'd heard it helped, and because I wanted to try to have an out-of-body experience, OBE. I stopped shortly after I had my first OBE. When I did it, I was floating above myself, looking at my body sitting on the floor, but then I kind of fell into the ground, and everything was black for a while. But then I entered a big cavern filled with fire. I flew around there for quite a while. I was just searching around. I didn't really see anything interesting, just rocks and fire. Eventually, I felt a strong jerk as I was wrenched upwards till I was back in my own body. I quit meditating after that. Out-of-body experience? That's pretty wild. Just started meditating, you could do that? Might be a savant. Okay, don't judge. It was an accidental curse. A friend once told me that she had a very creepy colleague who permanently harasses her. We were on the phone about this, and I said, "May his dick fall off." 4 weeks later, she's calling me again. Guess what happened? His dick fell off. Turns out, he was on holidays and brought back with him an infection of unknown origin. To this day, he cannot pee by himself and cannot have sex anymore, and the doctors even thought about an amputation. I personally think it was a coincidence, of course, but when my friend called me, asking me to guess what happened, I immediately knew what this was about. Evil witches laugh for 10 minutes straight. So this isn't unexplainable, but I have more experience with this than I would like. Before I got medicated, I had a terrifying period of my life filled with hallucinations and fused states, where I would wake up in the middle of ritual scenes, a lot of self-harm, waking up mid-chanting, and one almost suicide, one intentional but failed suicide attempt. Around the time, the most common hallucinations I had were faces with bleeding eyes screaming from the walls. I remember one time waking up with cuts across both my palms and a pentagram of candles, and it felt like the screaming faces had been chanting with me. Pretty messed up, but thankfully explainable. I don't hallucinate nearly as much now, and they are generally less messed up. Recently, we had rainbows appear in the house, which is new and oddly disturbing in its own way. I used to work as a counselor at a Pentecostal summer camp while I was in school for a degree in theology. The last summer I worked at the camp, we were doing a bed check and making sure no one was out of their room when I saw a light and heard a lot of shouting. I walked over to the door expecting to bust some kids for trying to sneak out, but instead I saw a kid writhing on the ground. The kid on the ground was this random kid from a random church who just dropped him off at camp. His youth pastor didn't even stay, which is not common at all. He was maybe 16 and had a cosmological tattoo that looked vaguely occultish. Apparently, right before I showed up, the kids had started to read the Bible out loud together, and this kid started growling and laughing. When I showed up, the kids had started praying for him, and he dropped to the ground and started yelling. It wasn't a seizure or a spasm. It was contortion. A couple of youth pastors came in and started praying over the kid, and it broke out into full-on exorcism. The kid eventually started heaving and throwing up, and everyone stopped. The kid started sobbing and said, "For 6 years it's followed me around. For 6 years it's been holding on to me. I was just a boy when it found me. I'm free, free." I didn't stick around to ask what any of that meant. My theology didn't have a good basis for demons, possessions, or exorcisms. I thought that all of that was hokey, but this kid was so genuine. No one touched him throughout the entire process, as far as I could tell. This was real, and it shook me to my core. Ancestors on my mom's side of the family practiced witchcraft. From what I know, they resided in a place called Piedras de Alumbre in Mexico. I've heard stories growing up about what went down for a very long time there, but mostly my mom and grandma don't really want to think about it since our bloodline is tainted and vulnerable. But I still remember a lot of things they told me about back then. DR, a cured Keras knife from Indonesia, emitted a booming sound late at night while packed in a box. It's a knife. It should not make that noise. Indonesia during the early 1980s. Rural Indonesia during this time was quite tribal and remote, and this meant that they held tribal beliefs. We're staying in a remote village, providing nursing and health care to the villagers. I was about to leave to go back to the west, so I went to a local market and bought this knife, which would be great for opening letters. The night before we leave, all our bags are packed, etc., and we hear a boom 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 sound, bit like someone banging on a wooden door. Wake up, go to the door, nothing but the jungle sounds, and the pitch is black. Go back to bed, again, boom boom. At this point, my friend wakes up to like, what the is that sound? It's the middle of the night. It continues the sound this time, and we realize it is not outside. It was coming from a packed box, which included the Keras knife. We opened it, and I shit you not, we could hear the sound coming from this knife. To be clear, this is a knife that is haunted or more years old. It's no gimmick or practical joke. Anyway, we freak out about it and throw the knife into the jungle out back of our house. The next day, we told some villagers, and they looked at us horrified, saying this is a sacred knife for a specific family, handed down generations, as the Keras knives are, and the knife, was expressing its displeasure at being in the hands of non-family. What creeped me out about this is that, until that point, I'd never experienced any paranormal, voodoo, whatever you'd like to call it. This made me think differently. It also made me think that if a community believes something so strong, it may well become reality, whether you believe it or not. I've been married to a witch for 21 years. She's from a family tradition passed down through generations. I love her so much, even though we live on different sides of the country now. But it's been a dynamic relationship, as the following will show you. During a rocky period in our relationship, we were having an argument in the living room. In this room hung a fairly large mirror, about 2 feet by 3 feet, that had been handed and handmade for her by a friend who was a fairly powerful sorcerer. As the argument began to reach its peak, I decided that discretion was the better part of valor, and turned to leave the room to give her some time to cool off. I had turned and was walking away through a doorway next to which the aforementioned mirror hung. Later, my dear wife would explain that she, furiously angry with herself that she had allowed things to get so far out of hand. At the peak of her anger, threw a heavy beer stein at her reflection in the mirror. Not at me, although the path the glass stein took actually brushed the hair on my head as it passed. The instant this stein left her hand, she regretted her impulsive act. She did not want to destroy the memory of her friend. What I saw and felt was a heavy glass mug brushing past my head, flying toward the mirror, and then comes the weird part. About 2 feet away from the mirror, well beyond the mug could come into contact with the silvery surface, it shattered into tiny pieces. About 1.5 pounds of solid glass splintered into a roughly eye shape. We spent the next hour sweeping up broken glass from every square foot of horizontal surface in the room, the floor, the tabletops, off of bookshelves, and even off the top of the mirror. In the coming week, we will find glass splinters in every room of the house. We made a pact that same night. I think she had used most of her anger up in the split second in which she reached out to destroy the stein so that it wouldn't destroy her mirror. But I do have one important piece of advice for everyone out there. Never piss off a witch. I was friends with twin girls. They were 7 and 8 at the time. For Christmas, they get a Ouija board. We had some fun with it, nothing too exciting, asking about boys, teachers, friends, etc. One night, I got woken up by sirens and ambulances at their house. I found out later that they were playing around with the board, and they received some very serious but very weird injuries. One of them had 3rd-degree burns on their fingertips, and the other had frostbite. I talked to them after, and they said they were using the board and started asking questions about devils and angels and whatnot. The little pointed thing started answering, and that's when it burned or froze the fingers and that were touching the pointer. Freaked me out. So I never went effed with that shit ever again. This was about 30 years ago. We were staying with my in-laws' parents out in the country, 11 wooded acres with a spring-fed pond swamp. While waiting for our place to be ready to move in, my SO worked the midnight shift and didn't drive after dark, so I was taking him to and from work. Normally I love going outside after dark, but that property was always giving me the creeps, and we made it feel like I was being watched from the woods. One night I accidentally locked myself out and was forced to sleep in the car. Sometime around 3 a.m. I woke up out of a sound sleep. My heart was racing. My hair was standing on end, like you might if you woke up from a nightmare, but I hadn't had one. Then I heard noises, like something was dragging onto the dirt gravel drive and some light tapping on the car. Of course, I'm already kind of freaked out, but I figured it's just an animal. I looked out the window, but couldn't see anything. The noises continued for about an hour. I tried turning on the headlight, and the noise would stop. I couldn't see anything out there. Turns out, turn the lights off, and within a minute or so, there are noises again. Needless to say, I didn't get much more sleep and left an early party to pick up my SO. I go to where he worked, a restaurant, and just about ran inside to wait for him. Still pretty creeped out. Then, when his duckweed struck on him, on the front and rear fenders, one back door, and all over the trunk lid. My SO turned white as a sheet and asked about them. So I told him. He then told me about how when he and his older siblings were kids, they camped out one night when the house was being built, and something came into their camp and left duckweed, mud, footprints. And something came into their camp and left duckweed, mud, and footprints all over. He suggested waiting until it was fully dark to go home. He had the next 2 days off, so he made some phone calls and found us somewhere else to say goodbye to for a few weeks. I've never been back that dark. Years later, Our daughter at about age 5 started crying whenever we talked about her staying overnight at Grandma's house and would refuse to go because of the monster in the swamp after she and Grandma had camped out on the back deck one summer night. I haven't seen anything related to my own work that was hella freaky. I did have an encounter with the spirit a few years before I started practicing. Scary as hell but unrelated. But my tarot readings are so scarily accurate that I don't do them for myself anymore. I've predicted family drama, car breaking down, and original girlfriend, her entire life ruined after she SAs and kicked someone out of her store. And it made international news. Not even a month before this, she did a reading with me and I predicted that she was about to have a hell of a rough time. Plus, she got death threats when asking about her career, and yeah, she did end up having to leave from death threats. I also accidentally predicted the return of my ex, the one who got away. It took a while for that one to make sense, but when it did, oh boy. I'll try to make some light of my readings, but every time they're so knows, it makes me uneasy. I'll still do them for others, but I don't want to know my own future that bad.